It was a quiet evening, the kind where the hum of the fridge competes with the occasional rustle of a newspaper. I was sitting at the kitchen counter sipping on my tea, feeling oddly at peace. My husband, Mark, was scrolling through his phone, as he often did after dinner. Suddenly, he put his phone down and looked at me, his brows slightly furrowed, the way they always were when he had a serious question. "So," he began, his voice casual but his tone not quite matching, "how's the account looking after the inheritance?" "Ah, the inheritance. My aunt had passed a few months ago, and she had left me a tidy sum. A surprise to everyone, including me. I hadn't done anything extravagant with the money yet. It was just sitting in the bank untouched. It's around 500,000, I said, trying to sound nonchalant. Mark blinked. Once. Twice. Then he leaned back in his chair, letting out a low whistle. "Wow. That's substantial." "Yeah," I replied, unsure where the conversation was headed. And that's when I noticed it. The flicker in his eyes, the slight tightening of his jaw. It wasn't just surprise. There was something else. I decided not to overthink it. After all, this was my husband, my partner, the man who had stood by me through countless ups and downs. What could possibly go wrong? Part 2: The Subtle Shift. The morning after our inheritance conversation started in the most unusual way, with pancakes. Mark was already in the kitchen when I stumbled in, still half asleep, drawn to the smell of coffee. He was wearing that ratty hoodie he couldn't part with, flipping pancakes with a flourish like he was auditioning for a cooking show. "Morning, sleepyhead," he said, beaming at me. "Morning," I replied, suspicious but too groggy to question it. Pancakes were an event in our house, reserved for holidays or weekends. Definitely not an ordinary Thursday. "What's the occasion?" I asked, eyeing the impressive stack already waiting. "No occasion. Just felt like doing something nice for my wife." He kissed me on the forehead and poured me coffee. Sweet, right? But Mark wasn't normally this extra. I sat at the table, sipping my coffee as he served me a plate piled high. It was almost too idyllic, like a scene out of a rom-com. That's when he hit me with the question. "So," he began, sliding into the chair across from me, "have you thought about what you want to do with the inheritance?" I paused mid-bite, caught off guard. "Not really," I admitted. "It's just sitting there for now." He nodded, his expression neutral. "Smart. No need to rush." But then he added almost casually, "Still, it's a lot of money. It'd be fun to do something special, don't you think?" "Maybe," I said lightly, but I could feel his eyes on me, gauging my reaction. I thought that was the end of it, but Mark kept talking. He suggested buying a cabin upstate. Think of the peace and quiet. Then investing in stocks. The market's perfect for tech right now. And renovating the kitchen. You've always wanted that island counter. Each idea came faster than the last and I could barely keep up. Mark wasn't just brainstorming. He was buzzing with excitement, practically vibrating with possibilities. Normally, he was the steady one in our relationship, the voice of reason when my impulsive streak took over. This wasn't that. "Do you have caffeine in that syrup or something?" I teased, hoping to break the tension. He laughed, but it felt a little forced. "I'm just excited for us, you know? This is a big deal." I smiled and nodded, but inside something didn't sit right. Mark wasn't usually one to dream this big. He was practical, methodical. This sudden surge of ideas felt out of character, like he'd been waiting for an excuse to unleash them. And now, thanks to the inheritance, he had one. Over the next few days, the shift became even more noticeable. Mark cleaned the garage without being asked, a chore he'd avoided for months. He cooked dinner twice. Not his usual spaghetti or takeout, but actual meals, complete with sides and dessert. He even took my car in for an oil change. First I was touched. Who wouldn't be? But there was something almost calculated about it, like he was ticking off a list. And the ideas didn't stop. One night, as we were watching TV, he casually mentioned his friend Jake's tech startup. "He's just looking for investors," Mark said, trying to sound offhand. "It could be a great opportunity." The next morning over coffee he brought up real estate. "Have you ever thought about flipping houses? It's risky, sure, but the rewards can be huge." By the weekend it felt like I was living with a motivational speaker. Every conversation circled back to opportunities for the money. He wasn't just excited, he was fixated. On Saturday morning, I was curled up on the couch with a book, enjoying a rare moment of solitude, when Mark walked in with his laptop. "Okay, hear me out," he said, sitting beside me. I sighed, setting my book down. "Do I have a choice?" He grinned, but there was an edge of nervousness in his expression. "What if we started a business? Something we could build together?" I blinked. "A business? Like what?" He shrugged, his enthusiasm undeterred. "I've been thinking about it. Maybe something in tech. Or a coffee shop. People love coffee shops, right?" I stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or cry. This wasn't Mark. This wasn't the man who once spent 3 weeks researching the best brand of garden hose before spending $25. This was someone chasing a dream, or maybe a fantasy. "That's a lot to think about," I said carefully. "Yeah," he admitted, his voice softening. "Just think about it, okay?" I nodded, but inside I was uneasy. Mark's behavior had shifted, and it was all tied to the inheritance. It wasn't just the money, it was what the money represented. Possibilities, freedom, ambition. And while part of me wanted to share his excitement, another part couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing at the edge of something, and I wasn't sure what lay on the other side. Part 3: The Idea Factory. By the next week, Mark had become a whirlwind of ideas. Every day he pitched something new, each more ambitious than the last. Started with real estate. "We could flip houses," he said one evening, bursting into the living room with a notebook in hand. "Start small, do light renovations, sell for a profit, and build from there." "Mark, you don't even own a toolbox," I replied, eyeing him over my wine glass. "Do you really think flipping houses is for us?" He brushed it off and moved on. The next morning, over coffee, it was a café. "A bookstore café," he explained, eyes gleaming. "Cozy, welcoming, a real community hub. You'd love running it." "You hate coffee," I reminded him. "And neither of us knows how to run a business." But that didn't stop him. The following day, he was on to stocks, eagerly showing me graphs on his phone. "This AI company is developing groundbreaking tech. If we invest now, we'll get in on the ground floor." "Mark," I said, setting down my mug, "do you realize how risky this all sounds? Startups, real estate businesses. It's not as easy as you're making it sound." "That's the point," he said, his voice rising with excitement. "We have this cushion now. We can afford to take risks, to dream big. Don't you want to do something meaningful?" I didn't know how to answer. I wasn't against dreaming big, but this wasn't like him. He wasn't just excited, he was consumed. At dinner with friends, he brought it up again. "Sarah's aunt left her a big inheritance," he said, his tone casual but his words pointed. "We're thinking about how to use it, maybe a business or investing in real estate." "We are." I asked, caught off guard. On the way home, I finally confronted him. "Mark, what's going on? Why are you so focused on spending this money?" "I'm not focused," he said, defensive. "I just think this is a chance to change our lives, to do something meaningful." "And our lives weren't meaningful before?" I asked quietly. For a moment he didn't answer. Then he sighed. "I just want us to make the most of it." And there it was again, that word, meaningful. As much as I admired his enthusiasm, I couldn't help but feel like this was about him, not us. The Mark I knew was shifting, and I wasn't sure I liked where he was headed. Now I'm left wondering. Have you ever been in a situation where trust was broken? How did you move forward, or did you? What would you do if you were me? Post your answer in the comments. Part 4: The Confrontation. By the time the weekend rolled around, I couldn't take it anymore. Every conversation with Mark seemed to orbit the inheritance, like it had become the sun in his universe. What started as excitement had grown into a fixation. I needed answers, and I needed them now. It was Saturday evening, and I was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling mindlessly on my phone, when Mark walked in with a notebook and his laptop again. He looked like a kid about to present a science fair project, his face alight with a mix of nerves and enthusiasm. "Okay, hear me out," he started, setting his things down. "I've been doing some research, and I think I've finally nailed it. This is the opportunity we've been waiting for." I raised an eyebrow. "We've been waiting for?" "Yes," he said, missing the sarcasm. "I found this company, local, small, but with huge potential. They're developing green tech, which is going to be massive in the next decade. If we invest now, we could." Mark, I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. Enough. His excitement faltered. What's wrong? What's wrong? I repeated, my voice rising. You've been obsessed with this money ever since I told you about it. It's like you can't stop coming up with ways to spend it. Do you even hear yourself? He opened his mouth to respond, but I wasn't done. First it was real estate, then a cafe, then stocks, and now green tech? Do you even realize how reckless this all sounds? You're talking about sinking $500,000 into ideas you've barely thought through. Reckless, he said, his tone defensive. I'm trying to build something for us. To take this opportunity and turn it into something meaningful. There it is again, I snapped. Meaningful. What does that even mean to you, Mark? Because to me, it sounds like you're chasing a dream without any thought about the risks, or about how I feel. His jaw tightened and for a moment he just stood there staring at me. Finally, he said, You don't understand. Then explain it to me, I challenged. Help me understand why you've turned into a walking Shark Tank pitch since I mentioned the inheritance. He hesitated, and for a brief moment I thought he might back down. But then he let out a frustrated sigh and pulled out the chair across from me. He sat down, running a hand through his hair. Look, he said, his voice softer now. This isn't just about the money. It's about what it represents. Do you know how many times I've dreamed of being able to take a chance on something, to build something of my own? But we've never had the resources. It's always been about playing it safe, making ends meet, sticking to the plan. And now you think this money changes everything? I asked, my tone still sharp. Yes, he said, leaning forward. Don't you see? This is our chance to take risks, to dream big. I'm not saying we blow it all, but what's the point of having this money if we don't use it to change our lives? Mark, our lives were fine before this, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. You're acting like this money is the answer to some problem we didn't even have. That's not fair, he said, shaking his head. You don't get it. No, I think I do, I said, my voice growing quieter. You don't want to build something for us. You want to build something for you. His face fell, and for the first time in days, he looked genuinely taken aback. That's not true, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I pressed. Every idea you've pitched, every dream you've shared. It's about your vision, your goals. Where do I fit into all of this, Mark? He didn't answer. Instead, he looked down at the table, his hands fidgeting with the edge of his notebook. The silence stretched between us, heavy and uncomfortable. Look, I said finally, my tone softening. I'm not saying we can't do something with the money, but we need to do it together. We need to think it through, weigh the risks, and make decisions as a team. This isn't just about you, Mark. It's about us. And right now it feels like you've forgotten that. He nodded slowly, still not meeting my eyes. You're right, he said quietly. I've been caught up in it. I didn't mean to shut you out. I know, I said, reaching across the table to take his hand. But we need to figure this out together. No more secret plans, no more pitches. Okay, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. For a moment I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the turning point. Maybe we could get back on the same page. But as I looked at him, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Mark might have agreed in the moment, but I knew him well enough to know when something was still simmering beneath the surface. And whatever it was, I had a sinking feeling it was going to boil over. Part 5: The Discovery. The unease from our confrontation lingered, but by Tuesday, Mark seemed back to his cheerful self, making breakfast, humming to himself, and dodging any talk of the inheritance. His phone, once left lying around casually, was now always in his pocket or turned face down. Something wasn't right. That night, after he went to bed, I opened his laptop. I'd never snooped before, but my gut wouldn't let it go. A bookmarked folder labeled Projects caught my eye. Inside, I found articles about investments, guides on flipping houses, and spreadsheets with detailed financial projections. One document titled Tech Start Proposal V3 made my heart sink. It wasn't a vague idea. It was a fully developed business plan. At the top of a spreadsheet was a list of expenses, and over $30,000 marked as personal funding. The next morning I checked our joint account. Several transfers labeled miscellaneous totaled just over $25,000, all sent to an unfamiliar account. My hands shook. Mark wasn't just dreaming. He'd been acting behind my back. That evening I confronted him. His laptop and the bank statements were spread across the dining table when he walked in. "What's all this?" he asked, paling. "You tell me," I said coldly, "because it looks like you've been using our account to fund a secret project." Mark sat down, his shoulders slumping. "I can explain," he started, but I wasn't letting him off the hook. He admitted to funneling money into his business idea, claiming he didn't want to burden me. "I thought if I got it off the ground you'd see it was worth it." "You thought lying was better?" I shot back. "You stole from me, Mark. How am I supposed to trust you after this?" "It wasn't stealing," he protested weakly. "It's our money, and I was going to pay it back. I just wanted to make you proud." I stared at him, heartbroken. "I don't need you to make me proud. I need you to be honest. And right now I don't even know who you are." He nodded, his face full of shame. "I'm sorry. I thought I was helping." The silence between us felt unbearable. For the first time I wasn't sure if we could recover. Trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. And right now I wasn't sure I had the energy to even try. Part 6. The truth. Mark's apology didn't erase the damage. For days the house was thick with unspoken tension, the kind where even the sound of a drawer closing felt too loud. He tried to act normal, washing dishes, chatting about work, but the weight of what had happened loomed between us like a wall neither of us could climb. By Thursday I decided I couldn't live in limbo any longer. I needed the whole truth even if it hurt. That evening I waited for him to come home. The bank statements and his laptop already laid out on the table again. "Mark," I said as he walked in, stopping him in his tracks. "We need to talk. For real this time." He sighed, setting down his bag, his face tight. "I thought we already did." "No," I said firmly. "You gave me a half-hearted apology and excuses. I want the truth, the whole truth." Mark hesitated, looking at the laptop like it might betray him. Then, with a resigned sigh, he sat down across from me. "All right. Ask me anything." I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "Why, Mark? Why did you take the money without telling me? And don't give me the 'I didn't want to burden you' line. Be honest." He ran a hand through his hair, his shoulders slumping. "Because I was scared," he admitted quietly. "I saw that money as a chance to finally prove myself. To do something that mattered not just to you but to me." "Prove yourself?" I echoed, confused. "To who?" "To everyone," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "To you, to my friends, to myself. I've always been the safe one, Sarah. The guy who plays by the rules, who works his 9 to 5 and never takes risks. And I was fine with that, I really was. But when you got that money it felt like a sign. Like maybe I could be more than just the guy who budgets and plans and never dreams big." I sat back, trying to process his words. "Mark, I never asked you to prove anything to me. I love you for who you are, not who you think you need to be." "I know," he said, his voice trembling. "But when you told me about the inheritance, it wasn't just a number. It was a door to a life I've always wondered about. A life where we're not just scraping by, where we can take risks and chase dreams. I thought if I could make something of it, you'd see me differently." Tears pricked at my eyes, but I blinked them back. "Mark, you don't need to change for me. But you do need to be honest with me. What you did, taking that money without telling me, it's not about the dreams. It's about trust. And right now, I don't know if we can rebuild that." He nodded, looking down at the table. "I know. And I don't blame you. I screwed up, Sarah. I let my ambition get in the way of our partnership. And I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that this was a turning point, that we could move past this and rebuild the trust he'd broken. But a part of me couldn't shake the doubt. What if this wasn't the last time? What if Mark's need to prove himself outweighed his commitment to our relationship? Over the next few weeks, things slowly started to return to normal, or at least a version of normal. Mark stopped pitching ideas and started focusing on repairing the damage he'd done. He transferred the money back into our joint account, even though it left him in debt with his personal funds. He promised to let go of the startup idea, But I could see the regret in his eyes every time he mentioned it. As for me, I couldn't decide if I was being too harsh or not harsh enough. I loved Mark, but love alone didn't feel like enough to erase what had happened. Trust takes years to build but only seconds to shatter. And while I wanted to believe we could move forward, the cracks in our foundation were still visible. One night, as we sat on the couch watching a mindless sitcom, Mark turned to me and asked, "Do you think we'll ever be okay again?" I didn't know how to answer. Maybe we would. Maybe we wouldn't. But I knew one thing. The inheritance wasn't the real problem. It was just the spark that revealed what had been simmering underneath all along.